So what is the problem? Well, for you guys, it's all about dealing with mountains of shit. And we all know that horses produce an awful lot because they are non-ruminants, and non-ruminants are very inefficient in the digestive process. They poo an awful lot. And for you guys, that means a lot of shoveling and a lot of vacuuming and a lot of everything else. So it's a key problem for the horsing industry. It's also a key problem with, of course, livestock that we intensively farm. If we're talking specifically about horses, well, what do you tend to do with all this dung? You are all very familiar with this whole practice. It's what we have to do to clean up our pastures. It's something I know virtually all of you don't subscribe to liking at all. So we either sell it or package it up or just manually compost it and move it. But it's a labour-intensive task, which is what we currently have to do. If we go on about what that whole process actually means and why you get rid of it off the pasture, it's because there's quite an obvious avoidance of manure by horses as there is any other livestock in the paddocks. And if you drive anywhere in the country on a paddock that's being vacated off its livestock and left to recover, you'll see these huge swards coming up all over the paddock. Each one of those has a pile of poo left in it. And so an area 5 times the size of that is left avoided because that's basically a zone of repugnance. No animal actually wants to eat around its own or someone else's excrement. So it's avoided. And so you get huge pastoral wastage. A couple of calculations about that. We've got, what, 9.5 million beef and dairy cows in production a year in New Zealand. Each cow on average produces about 11 poos. And times that by 9.5 million every day. Currently at the moment, the manure sits on the pasture surface for what, 4 weeks to 6 months, depending on the time of year, accumulating every day. So you times that value daily for, let's say, conservatively for a month, then times that by 5 for the area around each cow pat that's left. It's an awful lot of paddock left unutilized because of forage fouling and the avoidance of the manure. We know they avoid it because something's co-evolved with it, and it's a type of fungus which lives in manure, and it's evolved with grazing mammals, and it's produced these projectile reproductive bodies that shoot out 2 meters past that zone of repugnance to make sure that its reproductive parts are again taken up in the feeding process of grazing animals, so completing its life cycle. If it didn't do this, it wouldn't exist. So it's had to do that because of avoidance of the grass around where the poo is, where the animals just want to avoid. So we know they avoid manure. So they shoot it 2 meters away. That's basically what it looks like on horse manure. So if you're out on a humid day and you look at some horse manure, you'll see these little shiny white things, and they shoot these little reproductive spores out. So we overcome it. There's many reasons for break feeding, but one of them is to get the animals in to utilize that pasture, which would otherwise be avoided by, by stock, which would avoid it. But if you squeeze them all together and you corner off a paddock, you're forcing them into that environment where they've got to feed on that grass, which is not the greatest for the well-being of the animal itself. Just some key things about this whole process is for what beetles do and what the actual problem is, I should say, is surface runoff. And New Zealand's got a big problem with water quality here, and a lot of it's attributed to what's coming off the pasture surfaces. And a lot of that's dependent on how good the quality is of the soil. If it's compacted and ruined soil, things go across the surface rather than into it. And then, of course, we've got degradation in water quality. It's one of the biggest problems is there's the nitrogen and phosphorus, and of course all of the disease pathogens, etc., entering our waterways, making it unsafe to swim in or unsafe to utilize for drinking. And of course degradation of soils. That's one of the key things. Soils need air spaces, macropores. The grass roots require those air spaces as well to be able to function properly. And of course the microorganisms also require those air spaces. If you squash those through compaction and abuse of the soils, most of those microorganisms and grasses can't function to the optimal. And of course, as Franklin Roosevelt says, a nation that destroys its soils destroys itself.